Hi guys, welcome back to our channel. Today we're going to be talking about how to argue effectively. My name is Sky and this is my wife Lori. In our last video we talked about how to look deeper and understanding how to process that. And today
we are going to share with you guys some examples that we've been learning from our current books that we're reading right now. And so he's reading
this one's called I Used to Be a Miserable Fuck by John Kim, also named The Angry Therapist on Instagram.
And this one is recommended to me by The Rising Woman on Instagram. And it's The Dance of Anger by Dr. Harriet Lerner. And this book, as much as today's video, talks about anger and how anger is used as a guide to reform patterns in our relationships. And because everything, especially fights and arguments that come up, everything happens in a cycle and it feels like it keeps happening over and over again. And it's usually recurring patterns and themes that we want to break out of. So yeah, we're going to be talking about 3 points, 3 examples, and yeah, let's get started. Relationships are a constant, or is a constant, tug of war between the we and the I, right? And those two are complete opposites because you're dealing with independence and togetherness, and those two are very, very hard to balance. We also attract partners who bring out the work within us. We're going to be talking a lot about the concept of the underfunctioner and the overfunctioner, and we'll explain how fighting is like a constant dance. It's like an emotional dance that you do with somebody, and it's usually between the underfunctioner and the overfunctioner. And we say these words because we know and we respect not just male and female relationships, but relationships in love in different forms. So yeah, I hope you guys really enjoy this video. We really sat down and have worked through and written down all the examples and really believe in them. So yeah, we're excited. Let's get to the first point.
Our first point that we wanted to bring out would be the idea of responding versus reacting. Reacting makes you lose your temper, talk over people, and spill your negative energy on top of your spouse or your partner, your siblings, without even taking into consideration the kind of impact that you may bring up to them. We react from pain, and this encourages us to behave without a filter, thus creating a self-disruptive behavior for yourself and to others around you. Reacting does not create a space for healing, and instead we are passing on our pain, which results to arguments and failed relationships. In the other spectrum, responding is a form of taking responsibility for your own shit, and instead of reacting, you are taking care and really thinking about what you're about to say, and this allows you to have more patience and plan out how you're gonna approach your feelings or emotions towards a situation. Don't get me wrong, responding takes a lot of practice, and it requires you to practice empathy, biting your tongue, and swallowing your ego. And you must examine your feelings and trace them back to what's under the surface versus like what's above the surface. For example, by practicing this, you learn to resolve conflicts, increase trust, and strengthen your relationship. And we don't deflect our pain and frustration when we respond. Instead, we learn to understand it. And the example that I want to bring out from the book is John Kim brings out a scenario where you had a really shitty day at work, you come home and you see your wife or partner having a good time, drinking a glass of wine, listening to really nice music, and a reaction to that would be, why are you so loud? Why are you being so happy right now? Showing a lot of irritability versus a response would be, honey, I really had a shitty day at work. I need to just unwind. Give me a couple minutes and I'll come out here and join you. So with that, you're allowing yourself to create a space to heal and still communicating effectively with your partner versus lashing out over a reaction without really understanding why you're being upset. And this prevents, or I wouldn't say prevents, but it helps with not having to create an argument. And even if it does create an argument, you still presented yourself in a response where you're telling her or him, like, I'm having a really bad day. Let me just figure this out. Quick minute, we could talk about it and I'll join you after. And yeah.
So our second point is about not trying to change the other person. And that is something I believe we all struggle with, including us. And a lot of fights really stem from this point. So this one is really, really important. If you guys are taking notes or writing this down, put a big star next to this one. Yeah, it's not wrong to try and change someone else, but it usually doesn't happen, and it usually ends up just making us become very disappointed in the other person and in ourselves, and it just causes a lot of waiting and a lot of pain. So trying to change another person is provoking their ego, right? It's hurting the other person's ego. And in the fights that happen, you notice that it usually escalates because somebody is either offended or they feel like their ego is being hurt. And the more we challenge the ego, the more the fight escalates. So to not prevent, but to approach fighting in a more effective way, we want to invite growth and not provoke the ego. So we're gonna give you guys a scenario, right? A husband comes home from work. The husband talks to the wife about an injustice that happened at work. Somebody got promoted or got more credit than he did, even though he did more work than this person who got promoted. So obviously the husband is upset, right? But as the husband is telling the story to the wife doesn't let him speak, cuts him off and says, oh my goodness, aren't you upset? Like, you should be doing this, you should be doing this, like, you should be writing your boss a letter. And she just like goes overboard and just like gets really upset for him, right? And the more she becomes upset, the more he withdraws. So the more she becomes angry for him, the more he feels like, yo, I need to just chill. And what this scenario explains is the overfunctioner, underfunctioning relationship, where the wife is overfunctioning for the husband, right? Because she is feeling for him, right? She's doing the feeling work for him. He's not able to do it for himself. And this explains like this dance that happens, right? Because we're trying to pull more emotion out of it, but then he withdraws, and the more he withdraws, the more we want to show the emotion. And so what we should be doing in this scenario is listening, and listening with our hearts instead of our mouths, and instead of even more than our ears, right? Really listen with your heart and your soul. And this means to ask more questions. Again, ask more questions. How would you like me to support you through this? Instead of reacting for our husband, right? Instead of reacting for our significant other.
Yes. This allows the other person to really show vulnerability and really understand like why they're upset about the situation versus letting your spouse carry that for you. So in that scenario, because the wife was expressing so much emotions, now the husband can't really understand like why he's upset, because all he knows is that his wife's upset about it, and now he can't feel for it himself. And when the next time happens, this could create more arguments, because now he feels like he's not invited to be vulnerable. And that creates a space where nobody grows, or at least one person stops growing because the other person, could be vice versa, doesn't invite it.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So we're gonna move on to
third and final point that I wanted to bring up would be the importance of admitting that you're wrong and saying sorry. And there's also a difference between saying sorry and asking for forgiveness. Saying sorry basically is just you trying to like get the problem done and then move on to the next thing. So you'd be like, you'd mess up on something, you just say sorry and then forget about it. There's no really sense of like healing from that. Versus like forgiving and asking for forgiveness, you're saying sorry and also trying to understand like why the other person is upset, and asking for forgiveness back so that you guys know you are on the same page basically. And a couple of notes that I wanted to bring up about that topic would be, men who can't admit when they are wrong are basically refusing to grow, because they're not trying to own up to their own shit and really understand like, hey, I messed up here and this is why I messed up. But not trying to admit to it is saying like, yeah, I messed up here and I know why I messed up. Like, you know, like you're not trying to really understand. And this creates a space where people can't grow. And in every relationship, if you're not growing together, you're basically growing apart. Yeah.
That's a good one.
And if you won't admit it when you're wrong, it's just a matter of time before your significant other realizes that she's outgrown you, or she is outgrowing you, because she sees that you're not willing to really admit that it is your fault and that you are at fault because of X, Y, and Z, and you're trying to blame it on other things and make excuses on, I messed up here because this. No, you just messed up here. What are you gonna do after? Every time you're wrong, there's an opportunity for growth and for you to discuss and process and improve on that situation. You shouldn't allow your ego and fear to hold you back from the opportunities of growth based off your failures. And a scenario that was really nicely brought out in my book was, the author is a screenwriter and his wife was, or is, part of filmmaking as well. And they were invited to a dinner by a wealthy man that helped finance the wife's screenplay. Prior to this, the husband knew that this was a chance for him to really sell himself and bring in some money to the family. But prior to that, him and his wife had a conversation on the drive over, saying that he promises not to sell himself too much so that he doesn't embarrass his wife. But as the dinner approached and as the dinner ended, all he did was sell himself, showing him screenplays, showing him projects that he's done, some samples that he's written out. And by the end of it, he basically broke the only promise that he made to his wife before the dinner happened. And as you guessed it, the ride back was very uncomfortable. And all he could say was, this was an opportunity for me to bring in money. I had to do this for us. Versus like, I'm sorry, like I broke the promise that I made to you. And just admitting that you're wrong versus trying to make X, Y, and Z the reasons why it was wrong or why it didn't work out. Like you not having money, you not having a job, and like this being your way of being a man, you know?
Yeah. And another example that I want to bring out is something as simple as, you don't listen, right? To, I feel like I'm not being heard. And just that difference in translation is gonna make such a big difference, right? When we start owning up to to how we're feeling and everything that we did to cause the fight to escalate. So in that scenario, the fight was escalated because Sorry was trying to fix the fight. It wasn't asking for forgiveness. It was, I'm sorry, I did it because X, Y, and Z. And because he was defending himself, the wife, it was an invitation for the wife to keep attacking, and therefore the more he defended, the more she attacked, and there was another cycle and another fight escalated. Right? Cool? So does that make sense?
Yeah? Makes sense.
So to conclude everything, how can we translate our anger and use it as a guide to create a sense of mental clarity? Because it takes a very, very long time, and it takes a lot of practice for you to really be able to speak in the right way without reacting and responding with a good heart. It takes a lot of time and practice because we didn't grow up with this, you know. We didn't grow up in a place where we could practice fighting in a controlled state, in a good space. That's like unheard of, right? The work that needs to happen happens outside of fighting, right? It's all the preventative measures that you do in how you grow as people together and separately, like reading books together or learning from a podcast, right? Whatever it is that you and your husband or wife do, or your significant other do to grow individually and together, and bring that whenever you do fight. 3 points to remember so that you can translate your anger into a guide. And the first point is to observe. Simply observe the fights that happened and see if there's a pattern that reoccurs. The second point is to clarify. To clarify who is what and when. So who is the underfunctioner? Who is the overfunctioner? And when does it usually, what problem does it usually wrap around? Is it usually around financial decisions, or decision making about your kids, decision making about where to go, where to eat? And once you clarify your patterns, then you could really sit down and understand. So the third point is to gather data. And this means to really, really take a deep dive into who your partner is and who you really are as a person. And this means to talk to family members, to really understand, you know, who you are. Are you the oldest sibling? Are you the youngest sibling? Are you in the middle? Is your partner the oldest, and are you the youngest sibling? And how can you relate this when it comes to you being the underfunctioner or your partner being the overfunctioner? Does your partner usually take the leading role too much to the point where it leaves you no space to process your emotions or become vulnerable? So yeah, those are the 3 points that we like to give you guys. The first one, again, is to observe. The second one is to clarify the patterns. And the third one is to gather data. And these 3 points, excuse me, so you could use these 3 points to guide you guys every time you feel like you're angry. The point of this video is to show you guys that anger is not a bad thing, that fighting is not a bad thing. It's a room for both of you guys to grow. And if you're watching this video because you find you and your partner have been fighting more than often, I just want to tell you guys that it's okay, and that we do too. We fight all the time, and we have been together for quite a while, but we are barely getting a grasp of it, just by a little bit. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of help, even outside of your relationship. And we encourage you guys to seek help, professional help outside of your relationship outside of your friends, even if you feel like you don't need it. And like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the work happens before the fight happens. So really take the time to do the work. Do the work, and you know what it is. Whatever you need to do, write it down and really execute it. Really have that intention set and manifest your growth by talking about it, right? Talk about the problems outside of the fight, right? Outside of the escalation and the anger and the stress and the frustration. So yeah, we wish you guys the best of luck, and know that we love you guys, and thank you so much for supporting us. It means so much to us that you guys share our videos and that you like them and that you comment on them. And if you have any feedback for us, please write them down in the comments. We do read all of them and appreciate you guys so much. Yeah, bottom line is you are responsible for your own thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and the more you own up to it, the more other people will do the same for you. So yeah, good luck guys. Thank you so much.
Have a great rest of your day. Peace.